So one of the reasons that I think adults enjoy the occasional Christmas story is because they remind us of simple truths that adulthood can make it easy for us to forget. We also enjoy them because they remind us of a time, like bring up that nostalgic factor, a time when things were simple, but as adults we kind of know that there really was no time that was simple. We were just blessed to be children for a time. But again, we enjoy them because they remind us of simple truths that we sometimes forget. And we just heard a beautiful story from Australia about all the animals trying to help Wombat find a place in the nativity play. And I think we can all remember, or we all know someone who has struggled to find their place where they belong, where they fit in. Maybe it was someone you know, maybe it was you. But we all can relate to that. And the profound and simple truth that this story conveys and tells us is that none of us succeeds by ourselves. We know this. Even the most self-made person drives a car they didn't build. They eat food they did not grow, process, or raise. Live in a house they didn't build themselves. They use publicly funded roads, schools, healthcare, waste management, and I'm so glad I'm in Canada and I can include healthcare in that, just as a personal side note. The truth is that none of us needs to be sufficient or is sufficient by ourselves, but when we all benefit when we make room for each other. In all of Advent, this congregation has been asking, how does a weary world rejoice? Well, how did Wombat and his friends end up rejoicing? But they made room for each other, and they helped each other out. So how does a weary world rejoice? We make room for each other. It's not the only way, but it's a pretty good way. True, it may not be as easy or as pleasant as it was for Wombat and his friends, but our lives are made better and our world is made better when we make room for each other. And the story of Christmas is a story of making room, almost every moment of it. Mary made room for Jesus in her life and in her own self, quite literally by being that surrogate that Katie read about earlier, even to the extent of risking her health, her wellness, and her comfort. Elizabeth made room for Mary when she came to visit while they were both pregnant. In Bethlehem, a family made room for Mary to deliver Jesus, which is kind of a big way of making room for somebody. And I know traditionally we think about the stable and the manger being sort of like the least accommodating place in the world. But I want you to ask yourself, if you were visiting someone and staying in a very crowded inn, would you want to give birth in the very crowded inn or in the relative seclusion and privacy of a stable? I know which one I would choose, but it's up to you. And if we want to be more historically accurate with the text, what the Greek actually says, Mary gave birth and laid Jesus in a stable because there was no room, not in the inn, but in the upper room. It's the same word used at the Last Supper. There was no space in the upper room where guests would usually stay, which means that she was invited into the center of someone's home, into the most secure and well taken care of place in their home, because there was a manger there. Because that's where the family's most valuable possessions, most essential possessions would have been kept safe overnight. And by that I mean that's where their livestock would have been. This is the center and most secure and safe place for Mary to give birth. But however you want to interpret the text, whether it's the stable, which is the least hospitable place, or in this most hospitable place, however you want to interpret that, a family made room for Jesus, or made room for Mary. And later that night, that same family and Mary and Joseph themselves made room for a gaggle of shepherds to come and see this child. I'm not sure what the appropriate term is for a large group of shepherds, but gaggle seems to work. And then a few years later, when this baby was now a toddler, This family made room for these magi from the east to give gifts to their child out of the blue and unexpected. All through the life of Jesus, we see different people making room for Jesus to be in their homes, in their synagogues, in their towns. And we see Jesus making room for so many other people too. A Canaanite woman, a man with a legion of demons, the woman at the well, Nicodemus, who visited Jesus at night and needed the secrecy to be safe. Jesus made room at night for him. And then there's all those multiple times when the crowd sought after and pestered Jesus, when all he wanted to do was take a break and have some alone time. Jesus made room for those crowds then too. Even at the end of his life, Jesus made room for the one on the cross next to him, and Joseph of Arimathea made room for Jesus in his family's tomb. The story of Jesus, the story of the church, the story of Christianity is a story of making room. And when we do not make room for each other, we take steps away from being the people God has created and designed and wants us to be. We need look no further than the Holy Land tonight and Bethlehem to see what can happen when we choose to not make space for each other. Now, Bethlehem is not in the Gaza Strip. It's in Israeli-occupied West Bank. And I listened to a news report this week, and I'm going to quote it. Many Palestinian churches and Christian communities in the West Bank, Jerusalem, and beyond, i.e. not in the Gaza Strip, have decided to call off the celebration and good cheer that usually accompany Christmas. Why? Because of the war in Gaza. The war is so close that they don't want to celebrate, and the cheer seems disingenuous. And instead, they're adopting a somber approach to Christmas this year. It's too easy for them to connect the story of Jesus to the Holy Family fleeing Bethlehem 2,000 years ago to escape the massacre of children, to what's happening just a few miles away. How do you celebrate when that is your reality? The thing is, peace on earth is the Christmas dream, right? Every year at Christmas time, we think we might actually get to peace on earth, and Christmas time is typically the time where we get the closest every year. I mean, even during World War I, there was that famous Christmas truce when soldiers sang Silent Night across no man's land to each other. But peace on earth only happens when we make room for each other. How does a weary world rejoice? How does peace on earth come true? We make room for each other. Amy and I had the privilege of visiting the Holy Land in 2011, and while we were there, we met with the guy named Archbishop Elias Shakur. Any of y'all heard of him? Sonia has. Sonia's actually reading a book that he wrote. He describes himself as a Palestinian Arab Christian Israeli. Sort of shatters the stereotype we think about Palestinians and people in the Middle East. Listening to him share his family story, and his story forever changed the way I understand the modern conflict in the Holy Land. It was a life-changing experience. It really was. Even with the jet lag, it was life-changing. He had a lot to say that morning, but I remember him telling us, if you are a friend to the Jewish people, continue to be their friend. They need friends. But do not interpret that friendship as requiring hostility to Palestinians. And if you're friends with Palestinians, bless you. But if being our friend means that you refuse friendship with our Jewish siblings, we do not need your friendship. We need one more common friend, not one more enemy. And one of our friends who was on that pilgrimage with us wrote a song. It's actually in the wombat blankets, wherever that got to. I think it's back there, if you want to look at it. And in her song, she wrote about our experience. She opened by saying, I'm at a loss for words, for feeling, grasping time and space. I can't remember where I am and what I'm supposed to be. Again, that's a reference to the fact that jet lag was quite mean that trip. It was very difficult for all of us because we lost a full calendar day. We flew overnight for New Year's Eve, basically, so we were all discombobulated. But it also speaks to the disorientation that seems to encapsulate that feeling of being lost among all those competing emotions and situations and realities that is Palestine and the Holy Land today. And none of us are strangers to that these last few months, I don't think. That lostness and that complexity is why I really appreciate what Elia Shakur shared with us, and why I appreciate our friend who is an artist, how she encapsulated those words in her song. One wise father preaches friendship. Like, that's going to fix this mess. Maybe friendship's all we have. We can't afford anything less. How does a weary world rejoice? How does peace on earth come true? How do we fix this mess? We make room for each other. One wise father preaches friendship. Maybe friendship's all we have. We know we can't afford anything less. We make room for each other like Mary made room for Jesus. We make room for each other like the family made room for Mary to bring Jesus into this world and for shepherds to marvel at this newborn. How does a weary world rejoice? How does peace on earth come true? How do we fix this mess? We make room for the baby Jesus in ourselves and in each other. And we make room for friendship. We make room for friendship because we cannot afford anything less. And that, my friends, is what Christmas is all about.